Welcome, everybody, to our City Planning Commission meeting for the month of July. It actually was postponed from July 3rd to today, which is July 10th. It's 5:15 p.m., and I call this night in order. We actually are going to start with a couple of public hearings first, and then we'll get right into the City Planning Commission meeting. Public hearings are basically the ability for people to get up and either tell us whether they're in favor of the special use permit for that item, or they're against that special use permit, and we'll give you opportunity in just a few minutes to go ahead and discuss that with us. It is not an opportunity for you to ask questions, although both of these items are going to be on the Planning Commission meeting right afterwards. So if you want to hang around afterwards, and we'll try and answer as many questions as we can as we get through that part, or try and get as many answers as we can to each of these things. So let's start then with the special use permit for PI Tower Development LLC. This is a ground lease agreement secured from NAIM LLC, the owner, and Peter Shaw of Ton 80 Realty Services, the agent. And the address of this is 902 Churchill Street. And I do call this public hearing to order. In attendance, we have Commissioners Fair, Keelan, Public Works Director Justin Behrens, and Mayor Brian Smith. And we also have staff Andrew Dane and Kathy Kaza. So what we'll do is we'll just have Andrew just explain what they're asking for with this special use permit.
Sure. And is Peter in the audience here tonight? That is you. Okay, you don't need to get up right now. I just want to make sure you're here. So this special use permit is to construct a 125-foot pole, monopole, for use by Verizon Wireless at the address 902 Churchill Street. The tower will be located within a 70-foot by 70-foot ground lease area, and Verizon Wireless will locate its antennas and equipment upon the tower. Excuse me, it will be fenced off and secured, and also includes emergency backup power. I guess it should be noted that the Wisconsin state statutes pretty much spell out how these types of permits are to be granted, and so we essentially are following Chapter 66, 0404 of the Wisconsin state statutes here tonight in terms of deciding whether or not to recommend for approval the special use permit. We received all of the information from the applicant in a timely basis manner, and I believe folks have received digital copies of those. I think I put 2 extra hard copies up front there if anyone wants to review those. So we went through and looked at that, looked at the application, and then just checked that against the state statutes, and found that the application meets the requirements as identified in the Wisconsin state statutes. So we were recommending for approval the special use permit tonight. Peter, if you'd like to, you could step up to the podium.
Oh, hold on a second here.
Oh, sorry.
Hold on. So this is a public hearing. So at this time, if Peter wants to step up and give testimony in favor of the special use permit, he can certainly do that. But the guidelines is that, number one, he just needs to give his name and address, and he has to limit his discussion to 3 minutes or less. So if he wants to do that now, he'll also get the opportunity at the city planning meeting, which is right after this, to give as much discussion as he needs, or that the commissioners need to make their decision. Okay? So, Peter, I don't know if you want to, you'll probably be doing some duplication here, but
That's fine.
It would be appreciative.
I'll be brief. Again, my name is Peter Shaw. I'm here on behalf of the applicants for the facility proposal. Again, it's PI Tower Development, or Lend Lease. This is going to be the tower owner. Verizon will be the user. I Company is Ton 80 Realty Services, Inc., P.O. Box 578790, Chicago, Illinois. And obviously, we're seeking your support, and I'll look forward to the meeting afterwards, and we'll be free to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Okay, any other testimony in favor of the special use permit, which is to put up a tower at 902 Churchill Street? Any other testimony? All right, this time then we'll take testimony in opposition. Is there anybody that would like to give testimony in opposition to the request for the special use permit for 902 Churchill Street, which is to put up a cell tower? If so, step up to the podium, give your name and address for the record, limit your discussion to 3 minutes or less. Okay? I guess without having any opposition to that, I'll declare this public hearing closed at 5:21 p.m. Again, we'll bring this up at the regular city planning meeting in a little bit here. Okay, the next one is the special use permit for Home and Away Ministries Incorporated, and this has to do with the old Cherney Cheese property, which is at 705 West Fulton Street, and I think we all know this as Ruby Pantry. I think I'm not speaking incorrectly, am I, on that? Okay. And Andrew, can you again explain what they want with this special use permit?
Yeah, I'll just give a little overview here. I'm just kind of reading off the Plan Commission report essentially, but the special use permit proposals for retail and wholesale uses that exceed 10,000 square feet in floor area. The owner's Home and Away Ministries, Inc. Current zoning district there is B4 Strip Commercial District. Surrounding land uses are residential homes, commercial businesses, institutional businesses. As you mentioned, the property was previously operated as Cherney Cheese Plant, which closed in 2013. Property sold in 2013 and then again in 2014. In 2015, the request of the owner, the property was rezoned to B4, which brought the property into alignment with the city's preferred future land use plan. Current owner is seeking a special use under Section 17230. Paren 4, retail and wholesale uses that exceed 100,000 square feet in floor area. Owner proposes to use the facility for receiving, storing, and redistributing surplus food. There would be offices and a monthly distribution to the local community, as well as distribution of 30,000 to 40,000 pounds of food each month to pantry sites within Wisconsin. They expect to handle about 8 million pounds of food in the warehouse for distribution to pop-up pantries served out of Waupaca, with some stored and transferred to the warehouse in North Branch, Minnesota. Ruby's Pantry has been operating a wholesale distribution facility in Waupaca at 717 10th Street, Waupaca, for approximately 8 years. We had, I guess I'll just add a little bit more. We didn't, at the staff level, didn't do any further analysis on this as we were in discussions with the city's land use attorney to come tonight and give us some additional information. We're still waiting to see. Apparently, he's not here yet.
Okay, well, this is still just a public hearing right now anyway, so. Again, I missed a little bookkeeping here. We do have in attendance the same commissioners and staff individuals that we had at the previous special use permit public hearing. So at this time, I think you understand what this request is. We're looking for a testimony in favor of the special use permit for this property. If you'd like to give testimony in favor, please step up to the podium, give your name and address for the record, and limit your discussion at the podium to 3 minutes or less. Anybody that would like to give testimony in favor of? Yes, ma'am.
My name is Carol Westall. I live at 641 West Fulton. And I think this is one of the most wonderful things that can be happening to Waupaca. That building has been misused the last few years. And one thing that really made me nervous, they have those darkened windows on the side. And those people that didn't belong in there that were living in there. And I sitting in my backyard and I'm thinking, oh my, somebody's probably looking out at me. So I will be very pleased if this passes and they get to get their special permit.
Attorney Sorensen's on his way. He's about 25 minutes out.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Carol. Okay. Any other testimony in favor? Any other testimony in favor? If not, we will take testimony in opposition to this special use permit. Again, just step up to the podium, give your name and address for the record, and limit your discussion to 3 minutes or less. Anybody that would like to give testimony in opposition? Anybody that'd like to give testimony in opposition? All right, I declare this hearing closed then at 5:26 p.m. Okay, we're going to go right into our City Planning Commission meeting then. Today is Wednesday, July 10th, 2019. It is 5:26 p.m. I call the City Planning meeting to order. In attendance, we have, again, Commissioners Pat Fair, Alan Keelan, Justin Barron, Mayor Brian Smith, and staff. We have Andrew Dean and Kathy Kaza. You have an agenda. No, there was an addendum to the agenda, members. You got that actually today, where it says discussion item 4A. That's actually been moved up to under an action item, so it's going to be, instead of just discussing that tonight, they're requesting an action on that. So remember that that's now 3E instead of 4A, and there is no number 4 anymore.
I'll make a motion that we accept the agenda with the addition of 3E.
Second.
Motion by Fair, second by Keelan, that we approve the agenda with that one change. Any discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Well, against? That's right. Motion carried. All right, let's go. So what we're going to do here is we're going to talk about the tower, which is the right order of doing this. If we get down to letter C, which has to do with the home and away ministries, we are still waiting for our attorney to, he's about 25 minutes out, so,
What about the plan commission minutes from the last one?
okay, I'll get that.
Approve that.
Okay, thank you. All right, I got to jump back up here. We have planning commission minutes from June 5th for the public hearing, and also the meeting minutes. My secretary, Justin, has reminded me that we need to approve that. So,
Move to approve.
Second.
motion by Keelan, second by Fair, that we approve of last month's city planning commission minutes and place those on file. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Against? Motion carried. All right, let's go to special use permit for PI Tower Development LLC. And this is for putting up a cell tower at 902 Churchill Street. Andrew, do you have any more that you want to add to?
I don't think so. I think it's pretty straightforward. Application, like I said, was complete. And it's fairly prescriptive. We're following the state statutes, so I don't think I have anything else to add from the staff.
And we did, if your commissioners remember a few years ago when the state changed the law on cell towers, we did change our ordinance so that it matches the state statutes. So we are, it would be one and the same. I was wondering, is the owner of the property, is he here tonight?
No.
Okay, so you're just representing just the tower? Peter, sorry.
Well, yeah, I'm here to speak on the application, and as part of the application, the owner also signed an authorization letter stating that, he has consent to file on his behalf as well.
Okay.
So I don't think there's a lot for him to speak to.
No, it would have been nice for him to be here tonight, though. We do have a issue with him and his parking lot, and it would have been nice to
Okay.
use that against him, but we'll figure out another way to do it, so.
As long as you're here, can you give us a little rundown on construction in terms of when you plan to start, how long it might take, and, the project length?
Okay. Well, once you get into construction, we don't have a set date yet. Zoning and permitting is one of a litany of due diligence that we have to do both at a local and a state and federal level. Once we're complete with that, then it'll get scheduled for construction. I don't know if it'll make this year yet, so it'll either be towards the end of this year or perhaps sometime in the spring. As you can imagine, these are big companies and developing a network throughout a multi-state area, so their build plans are kind of big. And stepping back, once it does start, it's usually about a 6-week process. Up front, they come in and clear the site. Now, in an area like this, where you have a parking lot and the site's cleared on like a completely undeveloped parcel or in the woods or something, there isn't a lot of site prep. Most of it is underground, putting in grounding systems, foundations, and this and that. And then the tower would get stacked usually in just a couple days once that's set. Like I said, most of the time it's from the day they start to they're done. It's usually, about 6 weeks.
Does Verizon share its tower with any other services?
Yeah, and I'll kind of, there's always a, PI tower development. And so nowadays, companies like Verizon, but specifically here, they don't really want to own towers anymore. And the industry and just the economics of it, and there are companies that stand alone that they solely exist to own communication towers, and almost no different than a shopping center with 4 tenants. They have towers that they can lease to a variety of users, kind of vertical real estate, if you will. So when they do have a site that requires a tower to be constructed, they invite in one of these tower developers to actually develop and own the site, and then they become the anchor tenant. It's pretty commonplace across the industry. Most of your bigger companies have sold their towers to these tower owners. Many of them are publicly traded companies. Lend-Lease is one of your biggest land development companies in the world. There's American Tower, Crown Castle, SBA Communications. I think you have an SBA Communications tower. So that's what's going on here. So Lend-Lease is the tower partner that's been invited in by Verizon Wireless to develop the site.
So bottom line, then, who would be liable in the event that there would be some mishap with the tower?
Well, Lend-Lease is the tower owner, so it would start with
Or the
them.
tower owner?
Yep.
Okay, so anything else, Peter, that you wanted to bring
No,
up?
I mean, I think Andrew touched on it. It's, if you're familiar with that area, it's a commercial corridor. I think we found a good site, tried to buffer it. It's clustered around, business properties. That property does have a nice kind of 90-foot by 85-foot kind of square in the back there where the tower will go, backing up to, I believe it's the former bus storage facility. There's some mature trees back there that will provide some screening. So I think overall, it's a 125-foot tower, so it doesn't require blinking lights or anything like that. We have the FA back, which was included in there. So I think it'll be, for that general location, it'll be a good fit, and we're happy with the site.
Go ahead, Al.
There are no issues with the airport?
No, so we did file for an FAA, and then also the airport's got. I went to the state, and they provided the height limitation zoning maps. So if you're familiar with those zone maps, we're below that level too. So those tend to be more restrictive than the FAA. So I think we're 19 feet below what the hill zone would be right there.
Okay, thanks. I have one question.
Okay.
On the garage that is the current bus garage right now until they get their new facility, there is an antenna that's on there. That's not going to interfere with that antenna, and I'm assuming they're probably going to take that antenna down anyways, right on the bus?
Probably.
Yeah, I would guess. But
Yeah.
that won't interfere?
Yeah, and I don't know what that is, but essentially, Verizon and companies like them, they operate off of FCC licenses, and so they're limited to frequencies and powers, and the FCC makes sure that there's, you won't have that type of interference. So there's 2 types of interference that are traditionally possible. One would be frequency and power if you had two antennas too close to each other. Also would be physical blockage. So not knowing what that antenna is, if there's any sort of physical separation, I don't think you'd have an issue. Most of the, if it's like for two-way radios or like to, most of those are omnidirectional antennas versus like a point-to-point.
Yeah.
So the tower shouldn't impact. And I think there's probably good, if it's on that garage, the back one, it's probably 30, 40 feet.
Yeah. Okay. And then there was one recommendation by staff that the barbed wire be at least 7 feet off the ground,
Yep.
and you're okay with that?
Yeah, no problem. It was just
Okay.
an oversight on our part, on that part of your ordinance, that our typical standard 6 feet with the fence, but whatever the fencing requirements are, they're willing to adhere to them.
Okay. Awesome. So, Andrew, special use permit is recommended to council, or does city planning approve this? I ask this every time, but I think it's recommended to council.
I think it's recommended to council.
Okay. All right. So, Commission, we would be looking then for, the recommendation by staff was to recommend the special use permit to city council.
I move that we recommend it.
I'll second.
Motion by Keelan, second by Fair, that we recommend to council the special use permit for PI Towers development for a cell phone tower at 902 Churchill Street. Any discussion, any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Against, motion carried. I know you have one more item here, Peter, so you might as well just hang tight there with us. But just so you know, city council does meet
Tuesday next.
next Tuesday, so at 6 o'clock. All right, the next is the site plan review for PI Tower Development. And this, Andrew, you want to just explain to us what this is about?
Sure. Yeah, essentially, it's just the site building landscaping related plan review for the establishment of the telecommunications tower. And so, again, all the their plans were received a plan set here, which I believe you have copies of. We've reviewed this against the requirements in the ordinance and found it to meet the standards, and so we were recommending approval for the site plan as well.
Okay. Any questions on the site
My
plan?
only question was, where will the power for this tower be generated from? In other words, where will it hook up?
They'll bring a new service.
Underground?
Yep, underground, and if you look at the LP page of the site plan, it'll run along that south property line, and then it'll kind of do a bend to 90, or it'll go back. There'll be a transformer tucked in the very back corner of the property, and it'll double back and head up to the front of the site. So we kind of purposely wanted to pull it to the south property line in case there was any future development of that parcel, that it would interfere and they wouldn't have to have it relocated. So we tried to keep it like near the setback.
Okay. So site plan reviews are approved by city planning and do not need to go to city council. So if you're okay with the site plan review, then we would be approving that tonight.
Justin, you have any question?
I think we're good.
Okay. I'll make a motion then that we approve the site plan review for the PI Tower Development LLC.
Second.
Motion by Fair, second by Keelan, that we approve of the site plan review for 902 Churchill Street for a cell phone tower. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Against? Motion carried. Let's, we're going to have to skip C here, so let's go to D. Let's talk about Foundations for Living. They're requesting a substantial alteration of special use permit And their special use permit annual review for Foundations for Living, which is at 1421 Churchill Street. Andrew, is that you also?
Yeah, I can give a little bit more background on this. So they have some, what I would, they have some changes, I think some relatively minor changes to their floor plan at their warming center. So I think the purpose of the discussion was today to determine if that was a substantial enough alteration to trigger any additional level of review or additional analysis that would bring to bear on their existing special use permit. If you determine that it really wasn't a substantial alteration, they would simply proceed under their current special use permit. As part of that permit, I believe they're required to come here once a year and check in with Plan Commission. And I believe in addition to that, yes, their annual special permit annual review. So essentially, there's kind of two items here to do the special use permit annual review, and then for you to determine as part of that if you consider the proposed changes a substantial alteration of that special use permit. They're specifically have a corner of their warming center, which is currently a storage area, and they're proposing to put in a surround shower and a changing area in the bathroom so that people can take showers at this facility.
And your recommendation is?
And my recommendation that I guess I didn't see that being a major substantial change in use that would trigger a substantial alteration, and so I felt that would be a appropriate use under their current special use permit.
Kathy?
As far as the renewal, we thought that since they were coming to the Planning Commission, that staff's recommendation was to automatically, so they didn't have to come back this fall for a renewal, to bring it forward at the same time. The other recommendation from staff is that since they've been in the building a couple of years and have not had any incidents, that they're looking for a 3-year window now, and unless something comes up, that they would have to come back to the Planning Commission. So it's not that it's every year they have to come before the Planning Commission.
So a three-year renewal period as opposed to a single year?
Yeah.
So they obviously would have to get a building permit, and our building inspector would have to approve all of this. Do we know that Jane has had the opportunity, who's our building inspector, Jane, has she had the opportunity to look at this property and find out if this is something that, I mean, does it meet all the ADA regulations and plumbing regulations? I mean, I would think we would make that contingent that it would be approved by Jane.
Right.
Sure.
Yeah, it certainly would be contingent, subject to approval of or permitting, the municipal and state permitting requirements.
Okay. Any other questions, commissioners, about, let's just talk about adding the shower, and then we'll talk about their annual request. Right now, they're required to come back on an annual basis. We could talk about that after we get done with the discussion on the shower. Is there any other questions on the shower?
I'm in agreement with Andrew that I don't think this is a substantial alteration, so I would be inclined to not have to change the special use permit.
Yeah, I would go along with that. Are there any, will there be any changes that would impact the outer walls of this building? It's all internal?
That's what I'm seeing from just this kind of hand-drawn
Okay.
floor plan here.
Okay.
There wouldn't be any structural changes to the walls, just showing interior modifications.
Okay.
And we know that this drawing is going to satisfy our building inspector, or is she going to require?
I suspect they'll require some, a little bit more,
Okay.
Excuse me, can I address?
Uh,
I'm Wilma Akright, the executive director.
Okay, so, sure. But stand up to the podium and just give your name.
I'm Wilma Akright, the executive director of Foundations for Living. I'm a new position. The questions you're asking, I can answer probably easier than our commissioner here. We are just in the process of examining whether this is even an option, and in the process, we decided to, we were asked to do the use permit prior to the building permit. We do have all the drawings done by an architect that we'll give to the, at that point, once we have the funding. So that's all the schematics and stuff have been done, but we are waiting. This is the first step. The second step will be coming up with funding, and the third step will be going to the building commit, to getting a building permit, and then doing the job. So this is just step one of a multi-step process.
When, assuming that down the road, when the construction is completed, will it alter in any way the operations of your, I mean, I don't mean that people will be using shower, but hours, impacting numbers?
No, the numbers, everything will stay the same. The thing that it will impact is health, because when people that are on the street come to us, we will require them to take a shower as soon as they get there. We're planning on giving them sweatsuits to sleep in for the night that are clean, wash their, whatever they came in, and then when we send them out in the morning, they'll have clean clothes, and then wash the clothes that they were in again. So it's a matter of, we feel it's a health issue and really a safety issue in a lot of ways.
And your hours of operation will remain the same?
Okay, so I'm just a little confused then.
Okay, excuse
Are
me.
we, not from you, from
Okay.
Andrew. Okay. So are they actually requesting that, to put a shower in, or are they asking us to say we're okay with?
I think they're
Them-
asking us, asking you, the Plan Commission, to determine whether this proposed improvement would be considered a substantial alteration, and if so, we'd have to go back and do another special use permit process. If it's not considered a substantial alteration, they could move forward in their process under their current special use permit.
Okay, and so, I mean, we heard from Alan and Pat. Justin, do you have anything on?
No, I think it looks like an improvement to what they want to do with their operations into the community.
Do you need a motion on this?
Yeah, let's do that.
Do you want to
to-
just break the two up so that,
Well, let's just talk about just the shower right
Okay.
now. Yep.
Okay.
I would move that this is not, the special use permit continue as it has in the past, and this is not a substantial alteration.
I'll second that.
Okay. Everybody understand the motion and the second? It was Alan and second by Pat.
With the 1 year or the 3 year?
No,
we're not-
we're not even on
That's
that
the
yet.
next step?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay. All right. Any other discussion on that, on the change of the special use permit at all? Yeah. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Against? Motion carried. Okay, so let's go back. They're required to come back on an annual basis, and normally that's what, when do they,
Normally in November.
okay. Okay. So thoughts on allowing them to change from a 1 year to a 3 year?
How long has it been in operation? 2 or 3 years?
I believe it's been 2 or 3 years.
Oh, it's been at least 3 years, yeah.
3 years.
More than that.
5 years, there we go. Even with glasses, I can't see that far, so, yeah.
Truth be, I guess I would be a little bit more, be a little more conservative and say extend it to 2 years rather than going to 3 right now.
Yeah, I'd go along with that. In fact, if we go along with what Kathy was saying in terms of this year, that this would be their renewal, it's really well over 2 years because they usually come back in November, so it'd be almost 2.5 years or 2.25 years. So maybe that would be good.
Okay.
And by then, our new executive can give us a report, and we'll see where we are with the foundation.
Yeah, the one thing that I have seen in the past, when they do the renewal, is that we do get a little bit more information about how many nights, how many people, so on, and I don't see that in here. And we would certainly like to at least have that on file for us. So tonight, though, they are requesting that this be approved for the next 2 years.
Yeah.
Or actually, it'd be 2 years and
Right.
till October 31st
Right.
of '21. Okay?
I would make that in the form of a motion.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Fair, second by Keelan, that we approve changing the special use requirements so that they can come back on a biannual basis versus annual basis. Discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Against? Motion carried. All right, let's go to the Gusmer. That's the new item under action items. I have to, so normally we have 7 individuals that are on our city planning commission, so what makes up a quorum is 4 people, and we have exactly 4 commissioners tonight. Commissioner Keelan has already indicated to me that he has a conflict. I believe that it's your son-in-law, is that?
Son and daughter.
Yeah, our Gusmer Enterprises. So we are not going to be able to make a motion tonight for Gusmer Enterprises, but I think we can still discuss it tonight, and I think we're going to check with our attorney, but I think we're okay with just moving it forward to city council, because that's where it's going to go anyway. So understanding that, who's this, Kathy or Andrew? Or was that Attorney
A little bit of
Sorensen?
everybody, Justin,
Okay,
we tag teamed on this one.
okay. So tell us what we're doing here, and
Start with the water line.
Well, I see we got Chris and Tom in the back there, and they can come up and speak here in a minute, but basically, Gusmer Enterprises approached the city and wanted to do an expansion project at their current location on Ware Street there. It's approximately a 33,000 square foot expansion to the east. And in order to accomplish this, we need to vacate Shamble Road, which is the road that right away that goes up to the tower. Basically realign that around and then combine that with the current property and which they own on both sides of the road. So it's kind of a tag team mixed project. We're working with them to realign the road, water main, and accommodate their new build. So.
And so, since we are going to vacate property, that's why we need to have a public hearing?
Correct.
Okay, because it's city property. And so what we're asking tonight is just to allow the council to set a date for the public hearing.
Correct.
That's all we're doing.
That's all we're doing.
Okay. And
And
so,
then eventually, will we get to look at all of the specifics on the expansion?
Yes.
I mean,
Yeah.
we generally do get
You
the
guys
site
have
plan.
stuff you brought tonight?
Oh, okay. Well, might as well share it with us.
All right.
Do I need to go through the officials of?
If you would, please.
All right. Hello, Chris Gusmer, Gusmer Enterprises Executive Vice President. So thank you for having us. We weren't sure how much breadth of detail you needed, so we brought kind of a team. Tom Christie, our plant engineer, and then we've got Amy McNally and Jeremy Walker from Consolidated Construction. So
Thank you.
just a quick little bit of background while you're peeking at the prints. We've been fortunate to be going through some great growth, aligned with some good growth markets and customers that's requiring us to invest further in our facility in Waupaca. The improvements will include some additional production space so we can put some new equipments in, which will have some job creation. We will need some warehouse to support that, as well as expanding some of the employee facilities, break room, bathroom, things like that. So it's kind of the background. Just for a little bit of history, we've been growing pretty steadily over the years. 2013, we were under 100 employees. We've been doing some expanding based on a project internally that the city worked with us back to 2017, 2006. We added some operations up to the biggest site we could get. 2015, we were up to 125 employees. We are now at 170 employees. So we've been doing some nice job creation, nice growth. This facility expansion should allow us conservatively another 20 to 30 positions supported through Waupaca.
So Chris, this is the first time I've had a chance to look at this, and obviously, as Justin pointed out, the road in question that needs to be vacated. Can you just give us an idea? You've looked at this enough to know where is that going to go exactly? I mean, do you have any idea where that's going to be then?
Sure, and at some point I'll probably hand it off to these guys, but if you look at, we are offering up the property from our adjacent property, so on the north side of that and the east side of the property. Amy, do you have it signified? There you
I could probably answer that, Pat.
Yeah.
Oh, it's listed as road right away on the print there.
Yeah, up in the top right.
Oh, okay.
See, it's hashed out. That's where the new alignment would go. So tee off of Ware Street just to the
yeah.
east, something like 400 or 500 feet down to the east, and then take a 90 and
So
connect
it's a
back into
90-degree
Shambo.
turn right along the property line.
Yep.
For specifics, I don't have the exact numbers, but I want to say the acreage that's being given up of the road by the city is about 0.6, and what we're giving up from our property is about 1.2. So it's almost
Trade-off.
doubling.
Does that limit you then for obviously any development further east? Are you at your max now?
There would be some additional space we could develop on the east side if we needed there, yeah. And this is one of many options that we've vetted through, and there's still some details to work out, but this is the best from a long-term operational cost, being able to extend our operation and be as effective as we can.
So if everything moved along as you would like it to move along, what kind of a time frame would you look at in terms of this expansion?
Well, we are doing everything we can in order to have this up in place and usable by Q2 of next year, which means we would like to begin our construction in early September. So it's definitely an aggressive timeline.
Is there any future requirements that we know of? I mean, is there any special use permits or anything, Andrew, that need to be run through city planning in the future?
What's that? I think the one issue we were looking at had to do with outside storage, but I personally haven't seen enough detail to make a determination on that. I don't think we had any major red flags to date as far as the use of the land is concerned.
Okay.
So because we can't make a motion, but we still are going over the information, and then basically we're passing the ball here to the council on Tuesday?
Yes.
That's your idea, Brian?
Yes.
And then we can do an informal.
Well, you can make the motion, it's just you won't get a quorum
No,
to
we
vote
don't
on
need,
it.
we don't need to make a motion.
No.
It's going to go to council anyway,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
I appreciate what you're saying, but we're going to fail without the proper amount of votes, so. I mean, the key here is, and thank you, Chris, for supplying us with this information. Much appreciated. But the key here is that for this to work, and I know that Gusmer Enterprises and the city have worked well together here to look at the best way to make this work for Gusmers, but also to give us our ability to get to our property, our water tower on top there. And so I appreciate all the hard work that you guys have done and also the city staff has done here too. It does take as I said before, it does take a public hearing because we are vacating some city property. So that public hearing is going to be held September 3rd. Is that right? Right before a city council meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
So is this project going to come back to city plan at any point now, between now and then?
That's what I was asking Andrew. Does it need to? Attorney Sorensen is here now, so we can.
I apologize. I did 6 o'clock, and when you called me, I just died because I wrote as fast as I could.
That's okay.
Yes, the answer is yes. It has to come back to the Plan Commission. Tonight, you should really say, we're going to send it to Plan Commission because there's a public hearing, but the public hearing is in front of the council, not in front of the Plan Commission. So the Plan Commission could meet anytime between now and September 3rd to discuss all the details of the project. But by statute, it's required that you do that.
Okay.
Why does it have to be so long, until September 3rd?
It has to be, did you hear his question?
Why does it have to wait until September 3rd?
Yes.
For the public hearing?
Yeah, it's 40 days from the date that you can get it into the papers. So presumably, you're not going to get it in this week yet, so that gets you to next week. So it's 40 days from there according to the statutes. If you can make it the last week of August, there's a possibility that last week of August. I don't know what your schedule is.
Well, I think September 3rd was our
That's the council.
council meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah, otherwise we'd have to have a special
Right, and the way I
council meeting.
wrote the resolution, it was at your regular council meeting. So you wouldn't have to have a special meeting.
Well, if it has to come back to the planning commission, though, prior to, would it be feasible to do that in August, our regular August meeting, which would be about the first week in August?
For the council?
No, for the planning
Yes,
commission?
planning commission can do it anything. All they do is make a recommendation.
Okay, so we don't have to have a special time frame for that?
No, it's the council, whenever you abandon property or you adjust property boundary lines like this, you must have council action, you must have a public hearing in front of the council, not the planning commission.
Okay.
Okay.
So why does it have to come back to Plan Commission?
Only if you want it.
Yeah.
You-
Oh.
Or site plan
I
review.
thought he sort of implied we had.
Well, in the past, anytime we've had site reviews, we have brought it to planning, and it doesn't sound like it's going to interrupt
Right.
anything here. So,
Well, the only thing that would be, in my estimation now, would be good about having it come back in August, I assume then we would have a quorum. We could make an official recommendation to the council, and then the hearing would be prior to that meeting, and so if there was any difficulty, and then everything would be
Sure.
sort of taken care of then.
sure.
And if it's okay with the customers, that meaning that they have everything for us in August, then it kind of just dots the i's and crosses the t's for everything to move forward.
Good.
The biggest thing that planning commission wants to look at, excuse me, I hope I'm not interrupting, Mr. Mayor.
You are, but that's okay. No, go ahead. I'm just kidding.
And then I stop, open my mouth, I'm still going at 100 miles an hour. The biggest reason to come back to the planning commission is you want to, because we talked, moving the road and things like that, that's where you would make recommendations as a planning commission. Does this fit with the plan for the community? And because you've got the water tower, I heard you mention, you've got several issues you've got to deal with, and those would be recommendations you as a planning commission would make to the council, which is a legislative body and a policy body where you're a planning body. So if you look at your two roles, that's why you have two different tasks.
Okay. All right.
But
Awesome.
we don't need site plan review unless we want it. So none of those triggers were met, so we don't official need that. plan.
Although what he is saying right now, though, is that planning commission might want to weigh in on the, or should weigh in on the vacating of that land, because that does meet what the city is, thinks is best.
And make a recommendation.
And then we
Yeah.
make a recommendation. And remember, we'll have hopefully a quorum then, and others may have some other issues that we don't have tonight.
Yeah.
Yeah, and, my question to you, Justin, was if we, obviously, we're going to vacate some property along this, in this process, and then put the new one, how aggressive do we have to be in that?
What do you mean aggressive?
Well, I mean, does that have to be all done prior to anything being constructed?
Yeah, the water main has to be rerouted within the same, I guess, new road right away, along with, it's just a gravel road.
But
So
would that
all
have to
that
be
would
done
have to be-
prior to, or at the same time?
About the same time they break ground, we'll have to do the same
Okay.
in order to make
See,
it
that's
work.
what we'd have to recommend to the council, so that they know that.
Right.
I mean, I think that's all part of.
Okay. All right. Chris, and your team, any questions?
I do have a question. Jeremy Walker.
Can you step up to the podium there for us, please? We're actually on TV, so Attorney Sorensen, if you would use a microphone in the future.
I apologize.
Thank you.
Jeremy Walker, Consolidated Construction,
Yes.
Appleton, Wisconsin. Question I have is, of course, besides the relocate of Shambo and the right-of-way around the combined properties, we have a building project. So I was just asking Amy, in your experience, are we able to run a parallel path with the right-of-way relocate, the road relocate, I guess, in whole, with utilities and all, on a parallel path of the building project? So we would come to you with, in the same process, right? We'd come to you, Plan Commission, we have a site plan review, we've got stormwater stuff we're working through, all of those same things. There's nothing keeping us from running a parallel path, is there?
Well, not from a commissioner's standpoint. I don't know if there's any legal reason.
This really seems fun. There is no legal reason that you can, obviously, you take the risk. That's the only person that's, or not you, but the company takes the risk that it doesn't get done, and so they can approve the plan, and the plan would be approved subject to the council abandoning the road. So you can always do it, it's not conditional in the sense that it's not a violation of conditional zoning or anything, but it is conditional. You'd have to, but there's no reason, there's no law that says you can't do a parallel path. And for the record, my name is Steve Sorensen from Breezer and Roper, and now I'm on TV. Thank you very much.
Thanks. All right, any other comments, questions? All right, let's move on then. We're going to go back.
Wait a minute, Brian. So we're going to just, informational, all of the notes and the dialogue that we had here tonight will just go to council on Tuesday?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. You know, what's going to happen at the council is the council is just going to set a public hearing,
Yeah.
September 3rd. That's all they're going to be doing.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah. All right, let's go back then to the special use permit for Home and Away Ministries. We did have a public hearing earlier today. We had one individual that spoke in favor of it. We had none that spoke in opposition to this. I think this is why you are here tonight, Attorney Sorensen, Steve. And so I guess Kathy will let him lead the way here.
Yes, I think so.
If you want, you could just sit at one
Sit
of these
over on the-
seats there. If you
Better,
can sit where Justin sits. Is that okay with you? Yeah.
That may be moving up too far in the world. Sorry, Justin. Yes, this is a project that we've been talking about for quite a while, and the administration for the city brought me into this early in the process because the zoning ordinance that exists for the city clearly does not allow this project to proceed. The zoning district that is a non-residential zoning district, and under your code, there is no provision for this type of a operation or activity. Even if you stretch it, the only stretch that you could make, that you'd be permitted to make, would be that you could allow, if there was a restaurant or a retail-type operation that encompassed a majority of the activities along the front of the building, the exterior of the building could be used for warehousing to support the retail business under your ordinance. And I spent a lot of time looking at that. Even if you look at your special use section, which is where this would fall, there is no special use that would be allowed in this district. Your zoning ordinance only permits this type of a warehouse distribution facility, which is what it is, to be located in the I, or Industrial 2 district, which is zoned heavy industrial. The option would be, but that is not a good option, but the option would be that you could rezone the property, if that was requested, to Industrial 2, and then it would be a permitted use. The interesting thing is, under your zoning code as it currently exists, there is no category that would allow this as a conditional use. It would only be a permitted use under the I2 zoning. So if the use is going to be as it is described in the petition and as it's described in the materials that were presented to you, you would violate your zoning code if you attempted to allow this to exist within this district. All the arguments that I've looked at and I've researched for you is, well, what about the fact that it was used for that before or something similar to that? But that right of grandfathering, as you may want to use it, has dissipated quite a while ago by the non-use of the structure. And therefore, you could not, what they call tack, to a previous usage. The other problem you run into is if you do rezone, it would be spot zoning, and the other property owners in the region could obviously contest it as spot zoning. You did say you had a public hearing and no one appeared to be in opposition. And I'm strictly here to tell you that your standards, which are very well written and very, very clear, strictly prohibit this activity in this zoning district. So your only alternative is to rezone, and you have to worry about spot zoning if you do rezone. I will tell you, nothing in your ordinance gives you the latitude to create a special use or a special exception. Those don't exist under Wisconsin law. What exists is permitted uses under conditional use permits or special use permits, and those in this area, which I believe is B4, are not permitted, this type of facility. So, I mean, I'm here to answer any questions because I've researched the every living daylights out of this, but you
Well,
can...
thank you for doing that, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was kind of fascinating.
Yeah.
This property has been rezoned in the past.
That's
Twice,
correct.
I remember. And what was it originally?
It was a B2 district. It wasn't a strip mall, it was a business district. It wouldn't have been permitted in the other district that it was once
never
before.
an industrial zone? Okay.
So even when it was Cherney, it was not, Cherney cheese, it was not zone industrial?
No, that would have been a non-conforming permitted use because it's a continual use. It was there before zoning was placed on this property. And so if you're a non-conforming use, and if that use had been continual, there hadn't been any break in that use, then you could tack, and that's what's called tacking. You tack uses from the previous. But the minute you have an uninterrupted period of time for, in your community, 1 year, you can't tack anymore.
Interesting.
So could you just give us one more time our options?
Rezone, if you want to permit it, or say no. Those are your two options.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I looked at, and I'll assure you, I looked at every which way but loose to try to create a special use. And I did tell you the one special use, but in reading through all the material and in the discussions, we've had 2 phone conferences with the applicant, and they're candid and honest people. They're not going to use the front of it for a retail operation, even if they had people come in and pick up stuff or buy stuff. So you'd be opening yourselves up to a stretch of your ordinance that
Okay.
probably not a good idea.
Although if we did attempt to rezone it, that would go through a public hearing, and so the people that would not be in favor of the rezoning of that property would have the opportunity to say whether they're against, they would say they were against it, or people that are in favor would have the opportunity. The council would still have the opportunity to make that decision on their own.
Yet, here's the problem with rezoning, and I want to point it out really quickly, because if you rezone it, that doesn't just permit the requested use here, that permits anything that's in the I-2 district, and that's your heavy industrial district. So if somebody came along later and wanted to have a heavy manufacturing operation on this rezoned parcel, you couldn't say no, because that's a permitted use in that district. And it's not a conditional use, it's a permitted use. So you really open up a Pandora's box that you don't. Now, I would criticize myself because I said those were the only one. There's one other. You can change your ordinance. I mean, you could change your zoning ordinance and say that, you know, you could create a category that said that storage commercial buildings would be allowed in a B4.
In the B4 without changing the ordinance, but just altering what the language would allow for, or the.
No, that's a change of ordinance. You'd have to have a public hearing. It's like a rezone. Whenever you change your zoning ordinance, you have to have a public hearing, because everybody in that B4 district would have a right to come in and say, well, we don't want warehousing, because not just this property, but everything in that B4 district then would become potentially warehousing.
Right.
What are some, we'll let you speak, I'm sorry. Let us get through this part of it.
I just wanted to.
No,
Yeah, just hang on.
just wait.
Hang on.
Okay. So what are some examples of B4 besides this property within the city? Do we know? Does anybody know? Justin or Andrew?
Isn't a lot of Fulton?
You need to use your mic.
Oh, sorry.
I don't know the zoning code as well as Rhonda, but I believe, isn't a lot of the rest of Fulton Zone B4, so it's strip centers, it's, you know, restaurants, the phone service type of places, kind of convenience retail, neighborhood retail.
The major classifications in this district are hotels, fast food restaurants, convenience stores, gas stations, and other convenience-type businesses that rely upon highway traffic. That's really what the B4 district is. It's supposed to be a transitional district from highway to your more commercial retail operations of downtown. That's, if you read your zoning code, that's what it does.
And I just want to make sure that I understand what you said before. It was zoned B2 before, and it got rezoned to B4. And since it stopped being used as a manufacturing more than a year ago, I mean, it's been lots of years.
Yep.
That means that even under the B2, they would not be able to put a warehouse here.
That's a correct statement.
Okay,
It has to be I-2.
okay.
Under your ordinance as it exists right now, for a warehousing commercial operation, yes.
What are our, if we decided to rezone this, we would have to have a public hearing, right? And that would give everybody the opportunity to speak for and against that rezone, okay? Are we opening up, because it's spot zoning, or it wouldn't be spot zoning, it would just be redoing the zoning? Are we opening up Pandora's box at all by by doing that? I mean, there must be a reason why we have zoning in place.
Well, I mean, again, because we spent a lot of time discussing this, why did this ever become this transitional district of B4? It's because you wanted to encourage hotels, motels, convenience store. You wanted a kind of an entryway to the city that would pull people off of Highway 10 into the downtown area. And so it became a causeway type district with residential on the outside skirts of it. And that's one of the biggest reasons you used your B4, from my historical analysis of this, is because you have, excuse me, you have residential properties that surround this kind of this swath of a B4. And some of them are multifamily, but there's a lot of single-family residential right on the edge of this B4 district, which is why the B4 even has a lot of criteria in it that keeps the backyards clean, keeps the traffic down. It tries to minimize any non-street front activity is really what you're zoning. If you read how it's set up as a B4 district, I think that's a correct statement, Justin, yeah. Because I went through and looked at what B4 does and doesn't do, and it looks like what it's trying to do is it's trying to force quiet backs of buildings, active fronts of buildings, strip malls.
Regardless of what we may or may not want to do with this property, would we have to, or if there was any change of any kind, have to weigh in with the DOT because it's on a highway?
No, they would have to worry about DOT. I mean, that's not, you don't tell DOT, that's a real terrible thing to say.
I mean, we take into consideration, that would be the ownership would have to do.
That's correct. I mean, they would have to go to DOT and talk about traffic impact, and DOT could say to them, you have to do this or that. DOT could limit that. And again, I don't know how active DOT is in the city of Waupaca, but I was just down in Oak Creek last night, and they were very active.
They would be interested in this.
Yeah.
Because of the traffic counts, the location next to Hillcrest, how wide the driveway is, and the amount of semi-trucks that they're talking about using coming in and out, those left turns. So they would be reviewing this, possibly either conducting or recommending the development pay for a traffic study.
I know when this was being proposed as, for use as the oncology clinic, I think it was, there was a requirement to move the driveway or eliminate one of the driveways there. And I'm sure that would surface again.
Yeah. So whoever would occupy that property in the future, if that were ever to happen, we hope somebody, somewhere, would have to be, would have to get probably a traffic study, or at least contact DOT to see where they stand and all that.
It was the same thing that happened with, it was Anytime Fitness / the oncology.
Oncology, yeah.
Same thing. They were going to go through that process, but they never.
Yeah, right, they stopped. Yeah.
Okay. Sir,
Now, yeah, you need to get to a microphone, please.
just introduce yourself too, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chuck Schreffler. I'm a board member at Ruby's Pantry. I also happen to be an attorney from Minnesota. I hope that doesn't count too much against me. I did want to ask council and the commission about one other option I think you may have. Under 17.44.4C, I think it's the very end of that ordinance, there's a provision, modification of regulations, and there's some criteria for you in terms of what the limits are in your discretion, but I'm just throwing that out. I'm not the zoning specialist, I'm not your counsel, but I at least wanted to ask about that, whether that's also in play as a potential option here.
Can you read what one are you talking
So
about again?
I think I'm looking at 17.440, paren 4, small c. I think it's the very end of that section. It's titled Modification of Regulations. And actually, there's a D then, accessory uses and structures, but C is the one that I'm just wondering about and offering. This is a it's a unique property, and and I don't need to tell you this. There are just a number of factors that make it a unique property, and we're coming with a unique use to a unique property that will redeem, and I don't mean that in a legal sense, but make use of a property that is terribly underutilized and an eyesore at this point. So I'm just submitting that that this modification provision may give you some room to not rezone, not change the ordinance, and acknowledge the unique situation that this is.
So how do you see that modification as not somehow breaking through our ordinance or the ordinances that are in place, so that as our attorney and you listen to, how would we be able to do that without somehow breaking what the language in our ordinance presently say?
Well,
just because it's unique, we could therefore add it in and then not do anything about it?
Well, no, fair enough. Well, first of all, it is in your ordinance. I mean, what I'm pointing out to you already exists in the ordinance.
Correct.
And there is criteria here. It says, and I don't know if I'm reading this right or not. It just hadn't come up, and I just wanted to ask about it.
Okay.
Yeah. And so it reads, modification of regulations, requirements applicable to uses permitted by right or as accessory uses in any district by the regulations of this chapter may be modified or waived by the Plan Commission in their application to a special use if, in the Commission's opinion, they are not appropriate or necessary to the proper regulation of the special use, and where such modification or waiver would not, in the Commission's opinion, result in adverse effect upon surrounding properties. And I mean, this would need further analysis, but it just strikes me that, well, first of all, there are limits on your discretion there. It has to fit within those, you know, not have an adverse effect upon surrounding properties, and where in the first part of it is to a special use if, in the Commission's opinion, they are not appropriate or necessary to the proper regulation of the special use. In other words, I mean, as I read that, and it's just a gut thing. I think that's saying that the roadblocks that council is very appropriately saying, you know, we just don't fit in that use. I think you do have some discretion to say, given this unique property, given the, you know, Ruby's Pantry, it doesn't, it is kind of retail, but it's kind of not. We're not, I mean, it's a donation-based ministry. I mean, so are the things where we don't fit in that special use, are they the kind of things that in this unique situation, you've got some discretion to adjust without wholesale changing it to I-2 or opening up all of B4? So I just wanted to offer that up to you for your consideration, just because it hadn't come up, and it's kind of in the tail end of the statute or the ordinance. Probably doesn't come up that much.
Okay. Sir.
Yeah, what that is for is you have 3 parameters you have to look at. First of all, it has to be a special use that's permitted in the district before you even get to that statute. Then what it's referring to is regulations that you have that govern special uses, like lighting, like setbacks, and it says that if the Plan Commission believes that, given the location, the situation, the special conditions, a permitted special use, and that's always a tough thing to say because it's not permitted, it's a special use. So if there is a condition that normally would be applied that doesn't fit in this situation, you're allowed to modify because you're granting under the permission to give a special use. It doesn't allow you to fundamentally change the permitted uses And that's really what we're talking about here. We're not talking about regulations within the district. We're talking about permitted uses per se. And you don't have, that authority is not given by that ordinance. That was just to modify saying, oh, in this case, you don't have to put 3 lights on. You can put just 2 lights on the property because it's near the ball field anyway, or something like that nature.
Well, and logic would tell me that if we could do what Chuck is suggesting, then we could skirt the issue of having a public hearing if we went with what he was suggesting.
Oh,
So-
yeah.
So logic would tell me that we wouldn't be able to do that anyways. Yeah. Interesting question, and this maybe has nothing to do with it, but in your own words, you said that the property right now is an eyesore. What is Ruby's Pantry proposing to do to make it not an eyesore?
Well, I'll answer that as best I can. I also want to give Lynn Sarr an opportunity to speak to that. I think it's maybe it's having that building occupied is going to cut down on the risk of strange stuff happening around there simply because it's vacant now. And so I guess I don't mean so much from a street point of view that it's an eyesore. It just needs to be put to better use so bad stuff can't happen there.
Sure.
So I guess that was my point. But I mean, Lynn can speak to the kind of improvements that we want to make to that building if you'd like him to address that.
Well, before he does that, a question that I have as we've listened to this discussion, if the commission or the city in general moves in a direction of some kind of a change of ordinance, which would require public hearings and so on, would Ruby's Pantry, which may take some time, I don't know how much time, but certainly it becomes a sort of a lengthy process if we were to do due diligence and, cross all of our Ts and dot the Is. Would Ruby's Pantry still be interested in this property?
I really need to let Mr. Sarr address that one.
Okay.
Thank you for your time here tonight. It's kind of interesting, 8 years
Can you
ago.
just give your name? I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm sorry. Lynn Sarr.
Thank you.
I'm the founder of Ruby's Pantry, not just the executive director. From the very first moment, Ruby was my grandmother. And we started, we're in our 17th year. I pastored for 25 years. And one day we went down to get toys for missions trips we were doing to Mexico that we were already getting through another organization, and they filled our pickup full of food. We never knew they had food. We were just totally surprised. And we got the food and brought it back, and I called a realtor lady and said, Wendy, we've got a bunch of food we need to get rid of. You know anybody that needs food? And to my amazement, she said, yes, I do. And she came and got a couple of big boxes and brought it out to this house where this young couple lived and set it in the steps and knocked on the door. The young mother came to the door, burst into tears, and came out and hugged Wendy, and Wendy burst into tears, and they stood on the steps hugging each other, weeping. That's the format of Ruby's Pantry. It's not where we end up all over the place and how we do things, but that is the heart of what we do. We had no intentions of ever doing this. I was just minding my own business, moving along in life, and suddenly, we're getting truckloads of food, and I could talk for hours about this. But the fact of the matter is, we came to Waupaca about 8 years ago because there was an individual in your community who was behind on their house payments. The economy was terrible, and he didn't have any money, and he was in trouble. And he called me. I had known him for years, and he called me and said, what am I going to do? And we didn't really have any money, but I said, well, we could maybe start a distribution center over there, and that's what we did. And we came over here and started from ground zero and built the thing up. Today we do probably 80,000 families a year out of our Waupaca warehouse. Last year, we did about 20 million pounds of food that we handled. We have 66 employees. We service about 200,000 people this year. We're on track for providing food for families. If you take that and divide it by, multiply it by 3, you got 600,000. So the numbers are staggering. We have 12,000 regular volunteers in our organization, and they produce about 200,000 hours a year of volunteer time. There's another 26 or 28,000, I don't remember right now, but of people who volunteer for us on occasion where their companies send them out in groups to help with the distributions. It's absolutely amazing. We have, we're a $5 million organization. We're not, our whole world has changed. And we bought this building because it was big. Did we expect to get the offer on the building at the auction? No. But we came to do it and see what happens, because that's the way we live. We're always looking to see what God has in mind for us. And it's been an astounding success. Not that we're rich. We own 8 buildings, and, it just goes on and on and on. But the fact of the matter is, we came to Waupaca with the right attitude. And we've been here helping people for 8 years. And we need a big building. To build that building today would cost you about $7 to $10 million with the freezer that we need to put in. We are scheduled to take and rewire the place, which Tony is here from the Bauer Electric, and they've done our electrical work and snow plowing ever since we've been here. And it's the way it works. But we've never been impressed into pushing ourselves forward. This all happens from people calling us. And so we just, we're here because we think that, to be honest, we think God put us here. And we're here to do this, and I'm not trying to be insulting in any way, but we need your help to take care of the zoning. When we bought the building, it was zoned commercial. That was what we were told. All 7 of our other buildings are zoned commercial. That's the terminology they use in every town, and they're all zoned commercial. And so what we're going to do over there first thing is we're going to, maybe not exactly first, we're going to rewire the place, which is fine that they took the electrical out, because we're doing it in a simple form, and it'll be really good, and it'll be all brand new. The cheese company spent $4 million on this 10 years ago on this property. We're going to take and paint the inside, maybe some on the outside. We're going to send in a drying unit, a big drying company that comes in and dries the building out, because there's water that's been in the building. And we're going to dry that out to be as dry as it could possibly be. And then outside in the parking lot, we're going to redo all of the parking lot into a black, retar it, whatever you call it, and have it so it's looking right with some stripes where things need to go and so forth. We are not buying this building just to sit at and let it sit. We intend on putting in a $700,000 freezer in the back by the loading docks. We expect that we will spend $1 million in that building, and it'll be worth 6 or 7 million when we're done.
Okay, Ron, so though, getting back to my question though, was if the process to get to that point takes some time here because of the concerns that we have over the zoning and the language to allow for all the things you're talking about, is Ruby still interested in moving forward?
Yeah, we're not going anywhere. We're planning on being in that building.
Okay.
That's just the bottom line.
Okay.
We believe that God provided that building for us, and the details will get worked out.
Okay.
Plus, and I'm not trying to be over speaking, but I'm not sure what in the world you would ever do with that building if you got it. I mean, you just tear it down, and what are you going to build there? You got all kinds of empty space in town. Right down the road, you got, the mall. You got the store there that just went under, and big box store. There's nobody buying big box stores. I mean, it's a serious issue.
Well, I think we obviously know all of that, and I think we want to do whatever we can to see if this will all come together. Trust me.
I know it'll take some time. That's okay.
Okay, but that was my question, because the one thing as a planning commission that we always strive to do is to make the concerns that you have, the entrepreneurs, the building, to come true. We want that growth. Don't get us wrong, but in order to get to that point, it might take, as you've heard, a little bit more of a process here than you may have originally intended.
Yeah, it's okay. We're not worried about the time. We would like to be in there right now, so we had everything going for the winter. So we're not going through it without heat in there this winter and stuff like that. But that can be done very quickly if necessary.
Okay.
So, but we got a window. I'm not sure how long that window really looks like, or what's necessary for time.
Okay.
And we're not used to this. Is the first time I've ever went to a meeting like this. I mean, I had no idea what to expect. So we're just here.
Okay.
If you have any other questions about the work on the building, as far as the electrical, Tony's here. He can answer any questions you might have about how we're doing this. And Jim was here, but he's gone now, but he's also somebody that we do a lot of business with in town. And whatever you would like to know, just ask.
Well, I'll ask the mayor, where do we go from here?
Well, I think it looks like the only answer to this is to change their zoning to allow this, and then that would mean that all B4 would be able to do that. Or if we change the zoning to I2, we have two issues. One, it's spot zoning. And second of all, then all I2 properties could do warehousing.
Yeah, 25 years from now might be a problem if somebody else wanted to do something we never even thought of in there because of that. Like you said, we can't stop that.
Yeah, I think revising the ordinance to permit it in the B4 is preferable way to go.
What, the spot zoning, what, I can't think of the word. What kind of risk does that open us up to again?
Well, it opens you up to the risk of, well, two things. One is the fact that somebody could sue the city for spot zoning. Those cases, it's hard to prove damage, but if you could, I think your biggest damage factor in this case would be the residential properties that are surrounding it, saying, I bought this knowing that it was zoned B4 and that now you've got this truck traffic 24/7. I mean, I'm kind of, but that's where I think the majority would come unless it interferes. And again, I haven't looked at it, but it would interfere. Those are the people that would say, no, we built here because in your spot zoning is to allow something else. Therefore, you've damaged us and we've suffered damages and we're suing the city for that. The other side of the coin is the next person that comes along that says, I want to be spot zoned. You open up that Pandora's box of that the city of Waupaca is open to making non-traditional decisions with regard to zoning. And I'm trying to use my words very, very carefully. Spot zoning is not a good idea. Any planner will tell you that you don't want to go down that path. I do need to point out to you also that you're going to have to change your comprehensive plan because this would be a violation of the comprehensive plan as it exists currently also. So it's not just changing your zoning code, but your comprehensive plan. I forgot to mention that before.
Okay. Yeah, piggyback on that. Just one other thing. Thanks for pointing out that second point. Also just want to point out with regards to your statement of, potential opening ourselves up to the city up to any legal action. We did have an individual, and I don't have the name or the exact dates, but I do recall very clearly when this first came up that one of the staff mentioned that we did have at least one individual come forward with a strong desire to purchase this property, and I don't know how far along in that purchase process they'd gotten, but they had come in, done their due diligence, approached the city, asked if they could use this for warehousing, and our department had indicated to them that that was not an allowable use. So I think that's something probably that it's just another piece of information out there.
Well, I thank you, Andrew, for that, and it's not an allowable use. It isn't right now either. I think.
One thing I wanted to mention real quick is that traffic for us, we're not a big trucking company. Well, a lot of days we might have 3 trucks leave the warehouse. I mean, we're not running 40 or 50 trucks out of there or 100 trucks or anything like that. It's a very small trucking thing that takes place. The food is hauled in by the semi-loads every day, and it's distribution.
How many semis, since you interrupted me, I'll interrupt you.
Okay.
How many semis come in and out of there every day?
Well, that's a hard number to come up with, but on a Saturday, we might send out 4 or 5 to distributions. okay? And then during the week, we'll have usually about 3 trucks that leave to go pick up food, to pick up semi-loads of food. And there may be one more or something, but that's about it right now. But we're not geared, even in North Branch, we're bigger, bigger in size, but we're still not doing 5 semi-loads a day of our trucks leaving there and coming back in. And I don't know if we have 4 or 5 we have 5 semis here right now, and because one of them is usually broke down, and that's the way it works.
Well, I don't know that we're at that point yet where we even talk about entrances, egress to the property. I don't think we're even there. We're not even to the point where we're talking about what you're going to do on the inside of the building, because we don't know that this is an allowable use, or that council or the city is in favor of this. I mean, that's where we're at.
Right.
So as much as we know that you own this property, right now, it's not an allowable use, so you can't do what you're asking to do right now.
Yep.
So council needs to do, and city planning commission needs to do some brainstorming and some due diligence to decide whether they want to move forward with either rezoning this or adding to the current zone
Right.
to allow this to happen. And that's where we're at.
Yep, I understand.
I mean, there's nothing else that we could do tonight.
Right, I understand. One thing that you need to know is we intend on not tearing any walls down inside the building. It will be just like it is.
It doesn't matter.
Yep.
It doesn't matter. It really doesn't.
I got one more question.
Okay.
So the B4 is a retail wholesale district. If they could find a retail wholesale component within their business, that would make it a compatible use, or would that just be like putting lipstick on a pig?
Well, as I said earlier, you've got to show that's the substantial use of the facility.
Okay.
You can't just put a little room in the front that sells.
They can't like rent out the front, say,
No,
10,000 square
We
foot?
looked at that
Okay.
quite a bit, Justin, and I went and did some case law studies that says that's exactly like you putting lipstick on the pig. It's still a wholesale, and if the primary use is as a distribution center or as a warehouse, then that's your I-2 district.
Thank you.
We appreciate your consideration. I know it's complicated.
So let's back up here just a little bit, only because somehow we have to put this to bed tonight. We were originally looking at on our agenda to the determination of a special use permit, but according to our legal person, we can't even use a special use permit. So do we have to act upon that and say we deny that, or what do we do with that?
I think we just table it. We don't have to, we can just table it. If you want to make a motion to table it, that's fine. Yeah.
But what am I tabling exactly? Because they can't use this, come back with a special use permit.
It sounds like it was worded incorrectly as an action item to begin with.
Right.
So we wouldn't be able to act on it anyways. So I would say that this was all for discussion purposes tonight. And
Okay, and then next Tuesday, what's council going to get?
Well, I think, to tell you the truth, Pat, this is a planning commission issue. I mean, so this will be back at city planning commission at the next meeting, when we have a full group of
Before it would even
commissioners,
be- yeah.
before it even goes to city council.
Well, then, I think just for the sake of the minutes, I'll make a motion that we deny the special use permit, because we shouldn't be there anyway, for Home and Away Ministries as it's presented this evening.
I'll second.
Motion by Pat, second by Alan, that we deny the special use permit for Home and Away Ministries for 705 West Fulton Street. Discussion, any more discussion?
Well, and I just want to say publicly, we want to move forward with your plan, but we can't do it this way. We got to find an alternate way.
I understand.
We'll move forward.
I
Okay.
understand. Thank you.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Against? Motion carried. All right, so We are on to, what's that?
Item 8.
Okay, we're down to number 5A, which is the zoning code audit. And we have Mr. Jeff Sanders here tonight, who's done the audit, and that is in your packet. I know he did send out, was it yesterday, Kathy, you sent something out?
Yes, there was a white paper, there was an addition that
Okay.
Mr. Sanders asked us to provide the commissioner.
Mayor, I feel like I could just say a sentence or two just to cue this.
Sure, would
Introduce
you?
Jeff
Please.
and this project. So as part of my interim position here and working with Henry prior to his resignation, we were looking at and had discussed at the last Plan Commission meeting the notion of moving forward with a zoning code rewrite as well as potentially an update to the city's comprehensive plan. We can discuss that further in the next agenda item, number 6. But as part of that process, I had recommended to Henry, and he had concurred to engage with Jeff Sanders with Community Planning and Consulting LLC to just do a neutral third-party audit of the current zoning code to really identify what it is we're trying to fix. So that was really the purpose of engaging with Jeff, who has 20-plus years experience in planning and zoning and is pretty well regarded around the area, does a lot of work for various municipalities on zoning administration, zoning code updates, and comprehensive planning. So with that, I think unless there's any questions, we'll turn it over to Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Dane. Mr. Mayor, Commissioners. The audit's 19 pages long, so I suspect you wouldn't like me to go through all 19 pages of that. I think my discussions previously with Mr. Dane and the former city administrator were that I'd kind of frame the audit and then defer to the Plan Commission for any specific questions related to either my recommendations or the findings in general. There are 5 specific sections to the document. The first one was consistency and compliant with state and federal statutes. Second was specific updates, followed by general updates. Zoning methodologies and application forms and guides. So if you'll allow me, I'll just briefly touch on each one of those broad categories. And by all means, please interrupt me at any time. I'm not very good at lectures or sermons. Call back our previous person to fill in the latter. In terms of consistency and compliance with state statutes, zoning ordinances are dynamic, vibrant things. Unless you leave them alone, then they become stagnant, stale things. And the problem is our legislature, whether it be far left Democrats, far right Republicans, or anybody in between, are always changing the laws. And every time those laws change, it can invalidate entire sections of a zoning code. It can make them redundant. It can add requirements that didn't exist within the zoning ordinance. And your code is a little bit long in the tooth. It's been around for a while. It's probably if I had to guess based upon the wording, late 1970s, early 1980s is the derivation of this code. It's been updated a number of times over the years. So one of the first things I do when I conduct an audit like this is I start with the statutes. What's happened over the course of, say, the last 10 years that more likely than not would have affected this particular code. So if you'll notice, and I believe you have the summary of the summary, if you look at those 6 bullet points, the first one on there was 2017 Wisconsin Act 67. People who do what I do, people who do what Attorney Sorensen do, and people who do what the 4 of you do, really weren't all that fond of that particular decision by our state legislature. It created a whole bunch of problems because we have zoning codes in the state of Wisconsin dating back to the 1920s. City of Milwaukee was 1919, 1920. And the fundamental premise of those zoning codes for that almost 100 years was that there were uses that were allowable by right, and they were called permitted uses. And there was a second class or other category of uses that were generally considered acceptable within a district, but because of the potential for external impacts, required a greater degree of scrutiny. And we call those conditional uses. Your ordinance refers to them as special uses, but it's the same thing as far as Act 67 goes. What Act 67 did is it took the decision-making process regarding the types of conditions you can place on a conditional use permit, or in the case of the city of Waupaca, a special use permit, and through legislation codified the criteria. There were 3 specific criteria, and forgive me, this is esoteric foundational stuff, but it'll help answer some questions I believe the 4 of you might be asking or may be concerned about as we go forward. It set 3 specific criteria for the conditions that you could place on conditional use permits. One is that those conditions had to be based upon substantial evidence. Unfortunately or unfortunately, depending upon how one looks at it, District 2 Court of Appeals ruled last month on an issue that kind of affects that, and I can talk about that in a moment if you'd like. The second one was that the conditions had to be measurable if practicable. And third or final, the conditions had to be consistent with the purpose of the ordinance. So page 6 through the late teens in your document has the color in it. There's a bunch of color coded. Basically, I looked at every special use in your community in every district and using a color coding of green being, in my opinion, perfectly compatible with Act 67, blue being something that was generally compatible but may require some modifications, more likely than not oriented around the purpose of the ordinance element of Act 67. And then those that are red that, in my opinion, won't comply. They won't stand an Act 67 test if challenged. So at any point, including beginning right now, if you'd like to discuss any of that, please feel free. But that's the 2017 Wisconsin Act 67 element. I'm going to be far more concise, more brief on the rest of these. Solar and wind energy regulations, Wisconsin 66.0401 is Wisconsin's wind and solar energy law. Paraphrasing to the extreme, it basically says local government may not prohibit landowners from installing solar systems or personal wind systems unless the alternate of the two can be installed for the same price, providing the same benefit in the same general location. So basically what that says is you just can't prohibit them. You have some regulations in your ordinance that are outdated, not compliant with that law. And now with the proliferation of very, very inexpensive PV solar thermal, which your ordinance doesn't really address, and more pertinently, I think, is personal and small wind turbines. Your ordinance needs updating in those areas. It was mentioned earlier, I believe the mayor mentioned that your ordinance was updated to comply with 660404. That's the mobile tower siting regulations that popped up in 2012. It's true that your ordinance was amended. I respectfully question whether it was amended consistent with the statutes. Your ordinance dealt with a bunch of different kinds of towers in that section, and in general, 660404 is specific to cellular communications and internet-oriented communications, not, for instance, radio towers, television towers, ham radio towers, and things like that. Your ordinance puts all those kind of in the same grouping. The problem with that is some of the elements of that section of your code divert from 0404 and therefore are in violation of that state statute. I think Mr. Dane mentioned earlier when the gentleman from, I forgot his name, but representing Verizon in the tower, there are some conditions that your ordinance theoretically allows to be placed on a tower that violate state statutes. For instance, you can't regulate the color. You can't regulate the material. You can't regulate fencing around it beyond what the statute says. So again, there are challenges within your zoning code that could be challenged, if you will.
Okay, so let's just stop right there.
Please.
So if I remember, we made the recommendation to put that fence at 7 feet instead of 6. Well, technically, we couldn't do that?
I'm going to defer to the gentleman on the left to answer that question for obvious reasons. I'm an outside consultant who is not expert in your code. I spent a considerable amount of time going through the ordinance, comparing it with the code, and identifying places where I found problems. I'm not qualified to answer that question specific to this use.
Okay.
What I can say is, and this is going to be paraphrasing as well, 'cause, I mean, we could certainly pull up 660404 and read it, but it basically says you can't limit where they go. You can put it, they can put it in any district, and the local government can't limit it. Local government can place no conditions on those uses, including height, unless the height, or, excuse me, you can't place limitations on height. And I know your ordinance, I think, says 199 is the maximum. That's not compatible with the statutes. You cannot place a setback that is more stringent than the setback you'd place on any other commercial-oriented building in that district. So for instance, if you have a 3-story structure downtown, 3-story commercial building, you don't say that it has to be 310 feet or 600 feet from the property line. So if the structure falls over, it falls within the property. 660404 basically prohibits you from saying you have to have a setback that's the length that equal to the distance or the length or the height of the tower plus 10%. You can't do that anymore because the towers are designed not to fall over, so you can't burden the industry. I want to stress, by the way, I'm the messenger here, not the message.
So what he mentioned though, when he talked about they can piggyback with other entities on a tower line, that's all acceptable.
Correct. I think the co-location element is what you're referring to?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
There are 3, so you can build a new tower, you can co-locate on an existing tower, or you can co-locate on another structure. Those are basically the 3 provisions within the mobile tower siting guidelines. I guess and I apologize, I probably should have provided the white paper that the league put together in 2012 on this as well. What you can basically do is collect money. That's about the extent of it. You can't regulate them, but you can collect the money necessary to approve the permit. And that's only somewhat an oversimplification.
Do we get to collect a permit on anybody who collaborates on that tower?
So the co-locate, if I remember right, and this is going off memory, for someone who's putting an antenna through co-location on an existing tower, I believe the maximum you can charge is $500. For a new tower, I believe the maximum is $3,000. Now that doesn't mean you can just automatically collect $3,000. You have to build that into your code, saying for these. It has to how to describe it, and maybe Attorney Sorensen remembers the statute. There's a statute that basically says application fees need to be relative to the act of receiving, reviewing, distributing, and et cetera, reaching a decision on that. So even though the state allows for a maximum of $3,000, that doesn't mean you can just say $3,000. You still have to defend that figure. You probably can in a city. It'd be far more difficult to do that out in the middle of nowhere. I mean, if we were putting a 100-foot tower in a farm field, it would be difficult to defend a $3,000 review fee. In terms of the comprehensive planning law, I think that was discussed, and I completely, for what it's worth, I concur with Attorney Sorensen's statement earlier. Wisconsin's comprehensive planning law has statutory requirements that have not been fully tested yet in the courts. If you're going to put money on a fight between a zoning ordinance and a comp plan, I would recommend you put your money with the zoning ordinance. But the way the statutes are written are pretty unequivocal. It says a zoning ordinance and a community that administers and enforces zoning regulations, land division regulations, and official map must do so consistent with an adopted comp plan. So there's some question as to what that means. The best analogy I can give you is if your comp plan is pointing in this direction, your zoning ordinance is pointing over there, you have to nudge it this way. Does it have to be lockstep? No. But if you have a zoning map, if you have a future land use map that says this parcel is colored red, and we're assuming that red's commercial, and somebody wants to rezone it to purple for industrial or gray or whatever your color coding is, the answer that the Plan Commission is obligated to give is no. And then you let the applicant know that they can request an amendment to the comp plan. If amended then from red to purple or gray, whatever your color code is for industrial, and they come before you again and ask for a rezone, you're compelled to say yes. Because again, you are burdened with that 66-1001 3LH, I don't remember what the code is, in terms of the consistency requirement. So that's the comp plan law. It doesn't really play right now, but when the time comes to update your zoning code, and update your comp plan, if you do them concurrently or even semi-concurrently, make sure that they kind of follow that same path, if you will, if that makes sense.
So just for procedural purposes,
Yes, sir.
as commissioners, we all have been involved with changes in our ordinances and how the process works. What's the process if we want or have to change the comprehensive planning plan that we have?
Sure, if you have an existing comp plan, you have to comply with the requirements of 66-1001. But in short, there are 3 specific criteria you have to meet. You have to establish or develop a public participation plan that basically lays out how the process of updating your current plan or rewriting it or creating a brand new plan provides meaningful ways for the public to engage in the discussion, to engage in the plan. You have to do that. The second thing you have to do is notify all of your intergovernmental units, meaning every adjoining community, the county, regional planning commission, WISDOT, DNR, local school districts, all non-metallic mining operations that may exist within corporate boundaries. I may be missing 1 or 2. And then the third and
Sanitary district.
sanitary districts, thank you. That's one.
Or water.
Major utilities, sewer and water districts. And then the third element that is required is you must have a public hearing at the end. It's a class 1, so it's a 30-day notice public hearing as opposed to the class 2, 2-week notice for a zoning ordinance.
So after listening to the last discussion, we would have to do that to be in compliance?
I don't have your future land use map in front of me. I suspect it's either compliant now, which means you can't approve the rezone that was discussed, or it's non-compliant now, which means you still can't unless it says industrial unless it's identified as industrial use.
And
I
currently
think it's commercial.
Commercial, yes.
Right.
Currently, the future land use map is showing it's commercial.
As far as 2017 Wisconsin Act 59 goes, that's commonly referred to as the short-term rental law. Basically, it says local governments may not prohibit rentals that are longer than 6 days. So anybody in your community can put their house on Airbnb or any of the other short-term rental sites, as long as they're renting it out for more than 7 days, 7 days at a time, and there's literally nothing you as a city can do to prevent that, unless you develop a licensing program and an ordinance consistent with the new law. And that allows you to set standards. For instance, it's a maximum of 180 days in a 365-day year. You can determine that the 180 days are going to be concurrent. So you could state that the applicant for this, let's call it a short-term rental license, has to identify the 6-month period that he or she is going to operate this business. You have to license them. You can collect taxes on them. There's a number of other things. The moment any of these exist in the state of Wisconsin, whether or not the city decides to adopt the licensing program, they must comply with all state statutes regarding lodging, meaning they all have to be inspected, fire inspection, and the whole litany of other inspections. I guess what the league would say, not that I speak for them, what the League of Wisconsin Municipalities has said is if you don't have one of these, get one as fast as you can. Like tomorrow.
Put it on our work list, Kathy.
And frankly, the league has a really good model ordinance that you can use. It's a licensing ordinance. It would just require somebody like Attorney Sorensen, perhaps Andrew and others, to sit down and work out, changing the pronouns to be specific to the city of Waupaca.
Right.
But go ahead.
Brian, do you know much of any of Airbnb going on?
We do.
Yeah.
We've had one 4-unit apartment building that wants to turn over to Airbnb. I wanted to know if we were collecting taxes. And right now, I'm working with the chamber because I sit on the convention visitors board for the city. We are looking at doing that because of the change in this law.
So they would be, I think you sent it to me, or us. They would be required to pay room tax
Yes.
And I would say the state would probably require them to pay sales tax too, right?
And then they'd also have to have, like you said, fire inspections and everything else. So they'd be just like a regular hotel. They won't, you just won't be a mom and pop type thing that I'm renting my house out for a week here or there. So
So
the
when you
biggest,
say it has to be rented for a week, it has to be rented to one person for a week? Or it has to be available for more than 7 days?
That's an interesting question, Mr. Mayor. Let me tell you exactly what the statute says, and then we can kind of parse the language. To get outside of short-term rentals, any one of us who owns a single-family home can turn a house into a rental, right? We can rent it for a year and on a year lease and continue renting it forever and ever and ever. Most zoning ordinances, I would probably argue that no zoning ordinance can effectively prohibit that. If you're renting it as a single-family dwelling, how do I say this? The externalities of that use aren't different than if you're an owner-occupied resident of that building. Does that make sense? The moment it starts to become lodging, now we're talking about more of a transitory use where you have groups of people that don't have a foothold in the community. They're coming in for an event, perhaps. They're coming in just as tourists or whatever the case may be. You can rent your house. Prior to this law, local governments could prohibit any rentals that were 364 days or fewer, flat out. This new law results in two parts. One is in Ashwaubenon, which is where Lambeau Field is actually located. Like it's technically it's gerrymandered into Green, or it's annexed into Green Bay, but all those homes around there were turning into lodging, and the people who were still single-family owner-occupiers were not particularly pleased with having a whole bunch of intoxicated Bears fans next door during a Packers game, right? So there was a effort on the part of the city of Green Bay and the village of Ashwaubenon to effectively regulate them in a way that the state was not comfortable with. Concurrently, we have the Airbnbs and what's the other one?
Burbos.
Thank you. We're putting pressure on the state to do something to allow that commercial market, that industry to grow. So anyways, the legislature and their, with all due wisdom, passed this law that basically prohibits local government from regulating them other than for less than 7 days. So you as a city can prohibit any structure in your community, any single-family dwelling in your community from being rented for 6 days or fewer. One person continued chunk of time, or one family continued chunk of time, or one group. At 7 days, all the way up to 180, you cannot. Beyond 180, you cannot unless you have a short-term rental license, which then gives you the ability to say, to cap it at 180 days. And I apologize for the somewhat disjointed language that's coming out of me right now. All of us, planners, attorneys, local officials, are still trying to figure this out. I mean, it's now, almost 18 months old, but the logistics are still problematic. But I do agree with Ms. Kaza that there are a number of inspections that are required whether or not the city take any action. Fire inspection, building inspector, property inspection, ensuring that there's adequate parking on site, off-street parking on site so you're not parking on the street, appropriate lighting, visual diminishment screening, if that makes sense. It's fencing or vegetative buffering that diminishes the fact that these people who ostensibly were living next to another single-family house are now living next to a hotel.
Who's the responsibility with? The owner of the property or like Airbnb?
The owner.
The owner.
Yeah, Airbnb is just a conduit for connecting owners with temporary tenants.
Airbnb and Verbo is just like Travelocity with hotels.
They do collect I do know they do collect the state taxes for those facilities. They also provide liability insurance for the hosts.
I mean, we could belabor this, but I guess what I would recommend to Mr. Dan is he can provide detailed information regarding the statutes and DATCAP. DATCAP has a really, really nice 6-page pamphlet.
The other thing I would warn you about, I would warn you a lot about is there's a very, very large group of municipalities that are reading the statute much different, where it says residential dwelling, where it says that it has to be used as a home, residence, or sleeping place by one or, excuse me, or by two or more persons of a common household to the exclusion of all others. The common household statutorily and case law has been defined as you have to be related or you have to live together with a purpose of staying together for a substantial period of time. And that's really going to become where the blood ground is going to be on this. And I don't think Waupaca wants to get out ahead of this, but Lambeau Field started the problem. And now the resort cities of, you know, the Lake Genevas, even Madison to a certain degree. But I think the rest of the state is really working at saying, no, you can't stick party houses in the middle of residential neighborhoods. We don't care if somebody comes for EAA and spends the week there, but we do care if it becomes the party house for the bachelor parties, the bridesmaid parties. And that's where I think, before we do anything, I think you should really watch what happens, because that legislatively, I think, is going to be dealt with this year.
Yeah, I agree with Attorney Sorensen. The town of Lynn, which is the town that surrounds Lake Geneva, is a client of mine. Town of West Bend in Washington County is a client of mine. Both of those are at the forefront of this particular issue. The 180 days is interesting, right? Because there's 185 extra days left in the year. And the element of what Attorney Sorensen just mentioned, that 185 days is supposed to be the owner-occupier occupying that house. And what we're finding out there is speculators are buying homes. There's no owner-occupier. They're just renting them out for 180 days, and they're vacant for 185. And I'm actually, yeah, you know something, I can't actually talk about what I was just going to say, so I'm going to back off from that. The way the short-term rental law works is for 185 days a year, the occupant of that house must be the household as defined, as Attorney Sorensen defined. In other words, if I put my house on the market as Airbnb for no fewer than 185 days, I need to be living in that house. The other 180 days, potentially, I could go off on vacation, stay in somebody else's house as Airbnb. For what it's worth, zoning administrators, like myself, are not big fans of Airbnb. That's subjective, so I strike that statement. The last bullet under item 1 was RLU-IPA. It's the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, which potentially plays a role in the previous discussion, and I'll leave that to you and your council to discuss. But basically what RLU-IPA says is if a religious institution, a place of worship, a religious facility is listed as a use, whether it be permitted or special or conditional in a district, you cannot impose upon it any requirements that would be more stringent than any other commercial-oriented use. So, for instance, the way it's been interpreted by people who do what I do is that if you have a district out there, I'm just going to say B1 just to have a starting point for discussion. And the B1 district allows a number of commercial uses as permitted uses, and then lists a place of worship, a church, a mosque, a synagogue, whatever the case may be, as a conditional use or a special use. The burden of proof is on local government to demonstrate, consistent with the First Amendment, that there's something functionally different about that use that makes it special, that has to go through the increased scrutiny that a typical commercial use doesn't. The best advice I can give on this to any of my communities is just don't mess with the First Amendment. So when it comes to religious institutions, grant them a level of deference in accordance with RLU-IPA. And there's some issues within your ordinance right now. For instance, it mentions churches quite a bit. I would strongly advise you change that to places of worship or religious institutions or something that is not so specific to a certain faith. And that's it for the first section. Again, I thought these would go faster. but-
So just out of discussion, do you think that the party that we were talking to earlier would fall under that category?
With respect, I can't, it would be unethical for me to respond to that.
I thought I heard him say that they were a religious organization. Maybe I misunderstood that. In which case, that might bring some resolution.
No, if you read the statute, their operation is not going to, it's going to fall under nonprofit. It's not going to fall religious.
I understand that.
Yeah, but it's not going to fall under religion. They're not practicing religion. They're not worshiping. The food is not blessed food in the sense that it's prepared a certain way. That's what the statute really deals with, is you can't discriminate against, for example, a kosher dairy versus a regular dairy. In other words, you can't use a criteria in your ordinance that refers to a religious aspect. So if we have a snake worshiper, and we have to have the same rules for the snake worshipers as the pet stores and how they keep their pets. We can't say something, and it works both ways, by the way. If you read the statute, you can't favor a religious institution versus, so if I want to put an assembly hall for my Boys and Girls Club, non-religious, and you allow churches to have assembly halls, and I come as a Boys and Girls Club and I say, well, I'm just like that facility, you've got a problem. That's the other side of that statute.
In terms of the second kind of category specific updates, most of this is listed in detail. And again, I doubt that, I mean, if you have questions about it on pages 2, 3, and 4, I believe, of my audit, we can talk about that. But mainly it's formatting, conflicts between sections where a section will refer to something and another section would seemingly contradict it. That's what the bulk of that section is. One of the concerns I had regarding your site plan process, and I actually mentioned it twice in here, is that there are requirements that appear within your site plan checklist that are not codified within your code, and I question whether that's legally defensible. Because your site plan checklist doesn't have to go through the same review and public hearing process as an ordinance does, it seems to me that doing that would be ripe for a legal challenge. In other words, we have this ordinance that says these are what you have to do, and then outside of the regulations, outside of the statutes governing zoning ordinances, you create a checklist that adds an additional layer of additional burdens upon the applicant. The ones I mentioned specifically, if I remember right, on page, forgive me, I should have been better prepared to go here. Application forms, I think it was the last, yeah, page 19 at the very bottom. The site plan checklist includes a number of requirements that are zoning in nature but do not appear in section 17330. For instance, landscaping, minimum shrub size, minimum deciduous tree caliper, 5-foot concrete sidewalk, letter of credit, etc. All those things are listed in your guidelines as a requirement, yet they do not appear within the code, and I think that's a bit problematic.
Question.
Yeah, go ahead.
The 5-foot concrete sidewalk is listed in I think it's 804 Public Works. Is that
So
okay?
it's an entirely separate statute.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That as long as it has a foundation, and I reviewed one ordinance, so apologies for that. As long as it has a foundation within an existing ordinance of the city code, correct.
So we get site plans all the time. So what you're suggesting in here is that we can't, and we do talk about landscaping on occasion, or, tree planting, sidewalks, whatever. We can't be specific on some of those if it's not already been specific?
I don't know that I would say that. What I would say is if you deny a site plan based upon non-compliance with the requirements in the checklist, that issue better be clearly addressed within the zoning ordinance. So if it's if the zoning ordinance says, if you deny a site plan because the DBH of a tree is 2 inches too small than what the site plan checklist says, it better say in the zoning ordinance that a DBH of 18 or whatever is required for all trees. So not a great example, but the best I can come up with on the fly.
So we have a tree list. It's not in our ordinance, it's just a list that we maintain within Public Works. These are acceptable trees, you know, these are the ones we encourage for various reasons. We have ones that we specify underneath overhead lines. They're not in our ordinance, so during these site plan reviews, if we're making people change trees to what we want.
You're violating you're violating the statutes. In my opinion, I'm not an attorney, to be clear on that. If you,
Well, could we just put that list that he's talking about into the ordinance?
that's what I would recommend.
Or could we say in the ordinance, Public Works will maintain a tree list, blah, 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 to be followed? Or do you need the actual list?
So that's gray, not black and white. I like black and white, and the moment you start getting into the gray, it makes me a little bit uncomfortable.
What you really want to do is you want to tie it back to what your purpose of the landscaping rule is. In other words, you want to say that we will review site plans for landscaping so that it does not create a hazard, does not create a danger to the community, does not interfere with traffic. In other words, you really want to say what your purpose is, because you don't want to get in to the specific. You don't want to say it has to be this tree or that tree.
Right.
But you certainly can say that it cannot interfere with the best interest of the community. And somebody says, well, what is that? And then Justin says, it's these trees. I could defend that all day long as you don't say we're going to have no pine trees in town because we're not the pine city. Then you
Or
got
you
a
could have
problem.
height limitations, though, couldn't you?
What?
Height limitations on a
Yeah,
tree?
that's what you get under safety. You can say consistent with safe and safe practice. Let's just say safe practices, because that's where you get your setbacks for viewing, and that's where you will say, you know, certain kind of trees we don't want because they have a tendency to push up sidewalks, which creates a hazard. So if you tie it to safety, you try it to community interest, you can do a lot of things that otherwise you couldn't do.
Agree with every. And one thing I would recommend, instead of listing things you like, put a list of the things that you won't allow, prohibited species. DNR puts out a list every year of prohibited species because they're invasive. One of the trees that is on that list, that is one of the most common we plant, is Norway maple. And if I had my way, that tree wouldn't exist in the United States, right? It's an invasive tree that the more you have Norway maple, say goodbye to sugar maple because they just outcompete it. So putting a list of prohibited species for landscaping, it doesn't mean somebody can't put a Norway maple in their yard. It means a developer can't come before you with a landscaping plan that calls for Norway maple. That would be a far more legally defensible way of addressing that. And then everything else Attorney Sorensen said, set standards. I think it's always a mistake when I look at a zoning ordinance that says you must have X number of trees per 100 feet. No, let us know what you want to do. We want to diminish the view of your property from outside and let the developer come up with something. And then during your site plan review, you can say, yeah, that looks like it'll work. Instead of getting into a position where you're pulling a caliper out and trying to determine whether it's a violation of the code. Or worse yet, not even in the code, but a violation of your checklist.
So we get a site plan, they got 5 Norway maples on there. Can we recommend they change it to what's on our list? And if they say no, then basically we're done, right?
So if you're, essentially, yes. If your prohibitions or your requirements exist outside of the code, your ability to affect them is through persuasion, not through regulatory power.
And the real key, Justin, is you don't say, we're going to deny your permit because you're going to put Norwegian maples in. You think of some other reason. You seriously hear what I'm saying? You don't give them the lawsuit, you know.
One of the things I did notice is, it kind of struck me right away, is your design and historic zoning district is really an overlay. It's written as if it's a district, but it's actually an overlay. And maybe it would be more legally defensible if you actually converted that district to an overlay. But again, that's a recommendation, not a must-do. In terms of general updates, basically, one of the things I would recommend is going through the entire list of permitted uses and identify which of those uses don't exist in the city at this time. And the question I would ask is, would you like to remove those uses right now? The reason being, if it's listed, that use is something that is allowable by right, as Attorney Sorensen mentioned earlier. Now, that's great if that use is something you're encouraging, but if there's any question in your mind as to whether you want that use to be allowable by right, if it doesn't exist in the community right now, take it out of the ordinance. That way, if somebody does come before you and wants to pursue that use, they would have to go through the process of having it reincorporated within the code, go through the public hearing and all that kind of stuff. It gives you that little buffer of time to prevent again, uses that don't exist that you may not want to exist. One of the things I try to do whenever I amend a code is to make sure I'm not creating non-conforming uses. So it would be important to be confident that if you're removing bagel shops from permitted uses, that there aren't any bagel shops in the community that are going to be punished for that decision. There's one thing that may have some relevance to the issue that was discussed earlier, but there was a court case in the 1960s called Forsyth versus Babel. I think it was like 63 or 64. There was an appeal in 1997 that affirmed it. That basically says, and again, I'm going to defer to the expert on my left, but basically says if you have a zoning district that lists permitted uses or conditional uses, if a use is not listed, it is prohibited, period. Unless there's some statement to the effect of unless the Plan Commission determines it to be substantially the same as a listed use or something like that. So I think it's important to use that provision of the law to the advantage of local government so that somebody doesn't come before you and propose something that drives every adjoining landowner, nuts. That makes sense.
So before you go on.
Yes, sir.
So earlier, Andrew, you mentioned that, and Kathy did too, that somebody came and was interested in the building we were talking about earlier for warehousing, and you told them no, because it doesn't exist in the code. So basically what we did this evening, I think, is said to the other people, no, as it exists presently, by denying the special use permit. So really, we've been consistent to this point. So in order for them to do what they want, we have to go in a different direction, if we're going to go in that direction. But
there are 5 zoning methodologies, as I understand it, from the former administrator and Mr. Dane. There's been some discussion with the previous community economic development director about alternatives to Euclidean, easy for me to say, alternatives to Euclidean zoning, zoning that separates uses. You actually have some elements of form and performance based in your code right now through the overlays. And generally, again, from the perspective of a zoning administrator and a community planner, there just aren't that many communities that would even consider going wholly into form or performance based anymore. That was thought about in the 1980s and 90s. Some communities actually went whole hog, and almost every one of them pulled back. So what we have now is we have these hybrid zones or hybrid zoning ordinances where certain districts in the town, which are ideally suited to form-based codes, like downtowns, for instance, you might have a form-based zoning code or a performance-based zoning code. But for other areas, particularly peripheral residential development or industrial parks, you would look at something far more, separation of uses standard. So I don't know what the discussions are right there. I was just asked to provide opinion. I think you see the summary of those that I put together. And then finally, as far as your application forms, I mentioned when it comes to those checklists and when it comes to the application forms, in my opinion, both as a planner who has to administer this stuff, but also as someone who's occasionally working for developers, I think it's unfair if your application forms and your checklists don't verbatim match your zoning code, because that applicant's going to follow your checklist and your application form. And one of the worst things that can happen from the perspective of a developer is to believe that he or she did everything right and then come before the Plan Commission. Some Plan Commission member says, but you forgot to plant Norway maples. And they're like, well, where does it say anywhere in here that I'm supposed to plant Norway maples? So I did look over your application forms, and there are some areas in the forms I looked at, site plan, rezone, special use permit, that could be enhanced and improved, just to make it more expedient and more efficient, and quite honestly, more legally defensible too. Every time you have these little transgressions or these gaps, it increases, again, in my opinion, it increases the legal risk to the community. and it's not nice to do to people. So effectively, that's the audit. You have 19 pages of, certainly not sexy writing in front of you.
So here's the audit. How does this normally work? Then our city staff would take this, your recommendations, agree, disagree, whatever they decide to do, and then they would bring this back to city planning and city council for approval, or do we still use you to help us rewrite it? The areas that we feel need to be adjusted?
Sure. The first thing again, with respect, the first thing I would probably do is make sure Attorney Sorensen has a copy of it so he can look it over. And there's I don't remember the law, but there's a law in Wisconsin that basically says a local land use ordinance that is written by a non-attorney must be reviewed by an attorney before it can take effect. That's so that people like me aren't practicing the law without a law degree. In terms of what you do with it now, that's entirely up to you. I would describe this as a roadmap based upon one person's assessment of your code and whatever experience and knowledge and whatever I bring to that process. What you do with it from here on out, staff could do it. You could bring in any other consultant to finish the process. I mean, obviously, I would be very interested in continuing a relationship with the city. But this actually, when this meeting's over tonight, the agreement that we have in place concludes. So you're under no obligation to work with me, nor, as I mentioned to the former administrator and Mr. Dane, when you get into the nuts and bolts of the form and performance stuff, there are probably people more qualified than me to jump into this mix. I'm pretty good at this part of the process, but I'm not a form and performance-based code writer. It's not that I can't do it, but there are people who've done it many, many more times over than I have. So yeah, I think I would look at it as a potential roadmap for the process of amending the code.
So would you say that there are code writers out there that may be better than you are, which
Almost certainly.
I find that hard to believe after listening to and looking at all this, but I suspect there are. But so what would happen then is they would receive a copy of this, then they would integrate this material into the code in terms of actually inserting or changing so that it fits, and then give a copy back to us of the codes with all of these if they were to do all of these changes as proposed.
Sure, I mean, that would seem reasonable. The actual audit itself, you'll notice when you're reading it, some of the statements I'm making are much more definitive, like this is in violation of this statute.
Right.
Others are suggestions for discussion, community policy, I mean.
Right. Yeah.
So whoever engages in the process of amending the ordinance whenever that occurs, this would be a tool that they could use to guide them through that
And
process.
then they would have another kick at the cat with this.
Absolutely. And who knows, if it's a year from now, we may have 3 or 4 more idiotic pieces of legislation come out of Madison then.
I think that went on record, just saying, idiotic.
So if something is in red on that page 6 through 19 or whatever, it doesn't necessarily mean that you just delete it. It just needs to be changed to meet the state changes?
Sure. So thanks for the question, Mr. Mayor. Let me be clear that the color coding is my interpretation.
Right.
This is the 15th or 16th Act 67 review I've done for an existing ordinance. Every one of the previous ones were done either concurrent in tandem with a town attorney, a village attorney, or a city attorney, or an attorney reviewed it shortly thereafter. So like anything in life, you do it the first time and you make some mistakes, you get a little bit better the second time. By the time you get a little bit farther down the road, hopefully you're doing a little bit better job of it. The items that identified in red, what I'm saying is not that you should remove them. I'm saying that as a planner and a zoning administrator, I can't come up with a condition that I would place on that permit that would meet Act 67. And I want to, as I sent in an email to Ms. Kaza, your zoning ordinance at one time used conditional use permits. I think it was 2012 you said were, and now you special use permits. As far as Act 67 goes, they're the same thing. Conditional use permits, special zoning permissions, or special exceptions are covered under Act 67. But your zoning ordinance actually uses those two terms like synonyms, and that's problematic. You know, hitch your wagon to one of those two horses and ride with it and get rid of the other one. I tell you what, if you don't mind, the white paper that Ms. Kaza sent to you, I think Attorney Olson, Daniel Olson, when Act 67 first came out, I do remember when I got the notice for Act 67 and Act 59, the short-term rental, I looked at Act 67, and I kind of thought no big deal, and I put that off to the side, and I thought this Act 59 thing is going to be a nightmare. Well, as it turns out, Act 59 is a nightmare, but Act 67 is, Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, it just has teeth that sink into you. I suppose it would be claws that sink into you. The more we started thinking about what Act 67 means, it was kind of the proverbial peeling of the onion. The deeper you got into it, the worse and the scarier it was, which is why you'll notice all the papers that came out shortly thereafter from the league, the counties, the towns association, Mallory and Zimmerman, which is a firm that played a kind of a defining role in this process, and people who do what I do. We all start going crazy in February, 3 months later, because it was kind of like a hand grenade, right? You pull the pin on it, and then 3 months later, it explodes. So Attorney Olson, and I'll just read his, this is on the last page of that white paper that you have. Unless the city or village is willing to accept a conditional use in a zoning district with much less ability to guide when and where it exists, then eliminating them altogether or greatly reducing their availability is a reasonable and legally permissible response. So I just want to stress that the League of Wisconsin Municipalities is been around for a long, long time. They're expert in providing assistance and advice to incorporated communities. Attorney Olson is their second in command. He is not I know him a bit, he's not someone prone to hyperbole. And he basically wrote that it would be perfectly reasonable for the city of Waupaca to look at every special use you have and eliminate from your ordinance immediately. Now, that's a bit of an overreach in my opinion, but that's basically what he's saying there. So that was what I did when I went through that Act 67 review. The green stuff, I believe if I were writing a permit, I could put conditions on it that would stand an Act 67 test. The blue stuff with a little bit of modification to your zoning code oriented around the purpose of the ordinance. The red stuff, I can't come up with something. That doesn't mean that someone else couldn't.
Well, there's a will, there's a way.
Yeah, if you rob a liquor store and you're not caught, the punitive element may be a hangover, right? A local government can violate its own zoning code right up until the moment that it gets caught. For those of you who don't know, I work for the town of West Bend, and there was something called Lagoon Lane versus West Bend that came out from District 2 Court of Appeals about 2 years ago that sent shockwaves across the state. And then in June of this year, District 2 Court of Appeals just issued a ruling regarding Act 67, which further muddled the waters. So, yeah, you just never know when the alligator jumps up and bites. Just seems to happen in my communities with an uncomfortable degree of frequency, which might be a testament to you finding somebody else.
So the audit for us this evening is informational only. And then what we do with it, we discuss that.
Yeah, I think what we'll do is Kathy and Andrew and I will talk, and we'll see what direction, how we want to move forward with this in the next few months, and see if we want to split it up, or however we want to do it, yeah. So I think that's a good
I kind of have
work.
that under number 6, if we wanted to get into any discussion, essentially, along the lines what you said there, Mayor.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've had plenty of discussion, to tell you the truth.
Plenty of discussion.
Yeah, yeah. I think we're good tonight, aren't we, everybody? As far as, I mean, it's a lot there, obviously. Good information. Thank you very much for doing this, Jeff. I know you're getting paid for it, but I still appreciate it. And we'll have to get to work on it.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So are we ready for an adjournment?
No, I think we got a couple more
permits.
items that
More things, maybe.
Andrew wants to talk about.
Oh, the
Update on building permits and so forth. So
Yeah, I was looking for that in the packet here.
it's at the end.
It's at the end. Okay, so we can do it real quick.
Do you want me to stay, Mayor?
No, you can leave. Thank you, Steve.
I want it, this was on my own time. I wanted to hear, because I read through that material, and what he mentioned was really good things. Maybe a little, I mean, there's a little more latitude than some of it, but we could talk some other time.
All right. Well, thank you for coming. I
No,
appreciate
I'm
it.
sorry I'm late again.
No, it worked out. We got everybody up.
We're still here, so you weren't late.
Yeah.
Yeah. You guys, give yourself a little overtime pay tonight too while you're at it.
I'll give you an authorization form tomorrow.
Turn it into Kathy.
I don't know that, just briefly on reports, June 2019, the building permits issued are in the list here. The wood renovators was obviously a big one at the bottom of page 1. Construction value of close to 200,000. Is the Waupaca Foundry was another big one. I know you guys did. That's at the bottom of page 2. $6 million valuation. Significant permitting fees accrued there. So some of the highlights for some of the big projects. Mechanic, top of page 4, HVAC for the new Gold Cross ambulance building, $35,000 construction value. I was looking for the total here on page 6, so 6.5 million in new construction value for the month, which seems pretty decent. I don't know what your total equalized value is in the city off the top of my head.
That'd be Kathy.
Kathy could tell us what that is. It's probably $500 million or 3/4 of a billion.
Although the majority of it is manufacturing, right? I mean,
Majority is probably, in most communities, it's 80 or 90% residential because the manufacturing.
no, I meant on this.
Oh, on this. On
Yeah,
this. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
And then what do we have on code enforcement status update? I haven't heard. I know Elizabeth stays on top of this stuff, and maybe I don't know if Justin, you've had any involvement in any of the nuisance or code enforcement issues. I'm not really aware of any major ones that have, I guess, stuck out that bear further explanation.
Well, none of them are my rental units, so I'm good.
I saw what Jeff made the comment about the Airbnb. I've got an Airbnb.
Well, just anecdotal, my daughter lives out in Maine, in Portland, Maine, and when I was there last time, which was only 6 months ago, big headlines in the papers all about Airbnb and how many rentals are being done and how the neighbors have objected and what the council's trying to do with it to regulate it. I mean, it's a big issue.
It's a big issue.
In some places because it's not just a few houses, it's hundreds of houses.
Especially, I think, in places like Portland or Miami or New York or something.
Yeah, I mean, all of a sudden, people who establish neighborhoods are becoming transient neighborhoods.
Yeah, well, and it's kind of interesting too that we talk about it this week too, because this is the week of the Iowa Car Show, and of course the hotels are all full and people are looking for places to stay, and then we go to EAA and,
Same thing.
Right.
yeah, so it's,
It provides a lot of flexibility there.
yeah,
I think it's similar to the whole Uber discussion. You know, once the cat gets out of the bag, it's hard to put it back in here.
right.
Okay, well, now I'll make a motion for adjournment.
Second.
Motion by Pat, second by Al, and that we adjourn. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Against, motion carried. We're adjourned at 7:48 PM. Have a great night, everybody.